Yesterday, I had the privilege of attending the grand opening of the brand new Holocaust Museum here in Toronto. It really was an honor for me to be there. It started with different speeches, some addresses made by local dignitaries, members of the board, those who helped to create the museum from the Federation. There were politicians there like Premier Ford, the Minister of Public Safety, and our own friend here at Beth Torah, Marco Mendocino. There was an incredible teaching and story told, shared by survivor Nate Leipziger. It's my first time actually getting to hear a bit of his story. And he was one of the co-founders of the original museum in 1985, and a big part of creating this new one. But in 1985, when he co-founded that museum, it was with another woman, Gerda Freiberg, of blessed memory, who passed away just earlier this year. My previous synagogue, she was actually one of the members of the congregation. And I remember my very first summer as a rabbi getting to meet her. She reached out to me. She wanted to share with me a bit of her story. And later, right after my very first holidays, in that fall, she reached out again, wanting to take me on a tour of the museum. And she told me about her story and her experience as a survivor. And I knew she spoke often about this experience, educating Jews and non-Jews about the horrors of the Shoah. But she also shared with me how she came to be such a prominent educator about the past, and the decades that she spent refusing, like so many others, to talk about their experience, unable to share the pain and the trauma, the tragedy, the horrors that they experienced. But over the decades, she said, she saw that there was a need to speak out. She had to speak out. And it became her mission in life to educate others about the Shoah. And so part of that not culminated because she continued long after, but in 1985, creating that space. And I have a collection of some of the different speeches that she gave, and I want to share just a bit of what she said at the dedication of the first doors in 1985 of the Holocaust Center. I hope that those who enter through these doors in years to come will learn of the contributions the victims made to their families and their countries. It will become their obligation to devote their life to justice and freedom for all humanity. A powerful message. Those who walk through the doors of this museum, of this education center, it will be their obligation to devote their lives to justice and to freedom for all humanity. Holocaust education is incredibly important, especially today. We live in a world where there is so much hatred and division. We live in a world where even here in Canada, for the most recent year we have data for, more than half of all hate crimes were committed against Jews. The world needs to remember the story and tragedy of hatred. According to a study from just a few years ago, 1 out of 5 young Canadians have not heard or are not sure if they've ever heard about the Holocaust. More than half of all Canadians did not know that 6 million of our brothers and sisters, mothers and fathers, daughters and sons, friends and family, more than 6 million Jews were murdered at the hands of the Nazis. Similar studies in the United States have results that are just as disturbing. Holocaust education is needed desperately to fight back against ignorance. And also what we see rising too often, active lies and distortions that are taking place. Just last month, I've spoken about before the Polish Holocaust law, which makes it a crime in Poland to speak out and to blame Poland for committing any of the atrocities of the Holocaust, the Shoah. That it was all the Nazis, the Germans, not the Poles. I hear the responses from those who know what the Polish people did to their family, their ancestors who lived there. Just last month, Jan Grabowski, apologize, I'm probably horribly mispronouncing your name. But he's a historian of the Holocaust from the University of Ottawa. And he was supposed to deliver a lecture at an Institute of Holocaust Studies in Warsaw, Poland, about the role Poland and its citizens played in the extermination of the Jewish population. He never had the opportunity to deliver his lecture, because a Polish politician disrupted the event, shouting about the lies the speaker was there to tell, an attempt to defame Poland, knocking over the speakers, grabbing the cables, taking the microphone, refusing to leave or allow the program to go on. This is a politician, an elected leader of the country, refusing to allow this conversation, shouting lies and anti-Semitism. And that's why this new museum here in Toronto is so important, because too many are forgetting the story of the past. And so few are left today to tell that story firsthand. It really was an incredible space, this museum. I know some have gotten to see it even before the grand opening. There were pre-tours for certain people and occasions. But most of you probably haven't had the opportunity yet. It's only been open a day, and I encourage you, as soon as you have the chance, to go. To take your kids, your grandkids, your friends. It wasn't a particularly large space, but the museum is compelling. And it's compelling because it shares direct stories and does so with an incredible use of technology. There are large screens all throughout the space, which you can pick and choose and select and ask questions, but you can look up bios of people, their stories directly. And you can hear their stories in interviews that were recorded as if they're speaking right to you in short clips, answering questions that you have. There are tablets there for those walking through the museum to take. And you can scan throughout the space different images, which bring up on the screen the stories, as you can follow someone through their life before the war, during, and after. And it shows different artifacts, some that aren't on display, and it shows some things in an augmented reality space where looking around the room, you can see things that aren't there and interact with them. Images of history superimposed over the space you walk through. Now, it's an important space, a museum, because I think it uses technology in a way that really makes the exhibits come to life, that really make the stories compelling. That's going to be a wonderful space for the next generation to engage and to learn the stories that they won't be able to hear firsthand. Middle schoolers, high schoolers, a demographic that, as we see from the surveys, desperately need to learn. As a side note, it's wonderful here in Ontario that there's now a required part of the 6th grade curriculum for students to learn about the tragedy and horrors of the Shoah. But what makes this museum special, the technology in the museum as a whole, is it shows the forest. It gives you a taste of the vastness of the tragedy, of the suffering. But so often when that's the focus of Holocaust education, we miss out on the trees, the individuals, the people whose lives were forever changed, the people who were erased from history, entire families, the people who lost everyone that they know. And the museum does a wonderful job of sharing those stories in a very compelling way, bearing witness to those lives. The sad thing is, it can't bear witness to every life that was lost. All 6 million. It can't bear witness to all the millions who survived, who experienced that tragedy, who lost family. We're at a dangerous time in history when there are so few left to share that story firsthand. We need spaces like this. But I want to look for a moment at our Parshat and then tell you what I found most compelling about this museum. In our Parshat, talking about all of the different objects that are being built for the Mishkan, it tells us that God commanded Moses to command Aaron, have 2 silver trumpets made, make them of hammered work, they shall serve you to summon the congregation, the Edah, and cause the encampments, the machanot, to set forth. This verse uses 2 different Hebrew words, Edah and machanot, congregation and encampment. The great rabbi and philosopher of the modern Orthodox world, Rabbi Joseph Dov Soloveitchik, quotes this in his work, Kol Dodi Dofek, an essay that was based on a speech he gave at an Israel Day celebration almost 70 years ago. And these two words, he says, they refer to two different sociological experiences we might have. Encampments, machanot. These are things that are created out of self-defense. They're created to defend against an outside threat. The encampments after facing the Egyptians. Encampments, machanot, they thrive on fear. They come from the outside world. But an edah, a congregation, he says, is created from the inside. It is a group built around a moral idea. An edah thrives on love. Encampments can be found even amongst animals in the wild. Animals that work together to fight against an outside threat. But an edah, a congregation, it's solely a human phenomena. A group joined together in a single mission, in a goal. A group seeking to build, to create. A group that shares a vision of a future. Sadly, throughout history, our people have faced so many tragedies. And too often those tragedies define us as a machane, an encampment. A group protecting ourselves against an outside threat. Defining ourselves by the other. Defining ourselves only by our past. A machane. It's reactive. It keeps us strong against an outside force, but it's reactive. What Rabbi Soloveitchik reminds us of from our Parsha is that we're founded on both. Both as a machane, this encampment, but also as an edah. A group united in a vision of repairing a broken world. A group, a people united in a vision of creating a space for holiness to dwell in the world. And that's what I love about this museum, is that it shares the story of tragedy, but it also shares what came next. It shares the story of the lives of those Canadians that survived, that came here to Canada, that built a new life, a new home, that built a new future for the Jewish people. It captures what makes us not just a machane, an encampment, that part of the story, but it shares what makes us an edah, a people united in a vision of a world where hatred won't live anymore. As you walk into the museum, there are three different questions that you see right up front. How could the Holocaust happen? Is justice possible? And what can we learn from the Holocaust? This museum creates the space to ask questions, not just about the past, but how does the past connect to our present and to our future? What I loved when I was getting a tour of those AR tablets was that as student groups come through the museum, throughout their tour on the tablet, they'll be asked questions. And they'll respond with answers or some of their own questions. And when the group is gathered back at the very end for a discussion, it's not the same discussion that happens to every group. It'll be based on the questions they ask. How do we connect this story to today? How do we look towards a future where the tragedy of the past will never again be repeated? A tragedy that today seems more possible, sadly, than anyone would have thought 20 years ago, or 30 years ago, or 40 years ago. We live in a world where it seems more and more okay to spew anti-Semitic hatred, where more and more the stories of Jews who are victimized, who are attacked or forgotten about, or the blame is put on them. So often we see that in the headlines when a story about what happens in New York, when someone in a black hat or with tzitzit hanging out is beaten up. The blame is placed on the division between the Jewish community, the Hasidic community, and the rest of the world. Maybe if they were a little more integrated in the world, this wouldn't happen. Violence, hatred, because someone's different, is never okay. It goes back to the words that Gerda ended her statement with when she dedicated the doors of the first museum. That those who walk through it will devote their life to justice and freedom for all humanity. In the Haftorah today from Zechariah, it talks about the light of the lamps. It's not actually part of the Haftorah, but if you continue reading in that chapter in Zechariah, the prophet tells us what the lamps, what that light signifies. God, divinity, holiness. It's a sacred light. The amazing thing about light versus darkness is that light is actually a physical something. It can be measured. Darkness, if you ever take a physics class, isn't really a thing. the absence of light. Evil is the absence of good. And in a space where God rests, darkness can't. All it takes is a little bit of light to banish darkness. And light builds on light. We see that in the menorah that was in the temple. Each branch that's lit, it's shone brighter and brighter. So together, along with all who enter this new museum, may we all devote our lives to justice and freedom for all humanity. May we share a light of sacredness, of holiness, that banishes evil. May we share a light that makes sure that never again, in our time or in the future, will darkness ever rise. Shabbat Shalom.